In the last session, we were talking about the craft of writing a piece of fiction that is short. Now, we tried to define what we meant by short, and we explained short in short fiction or short story as the skills that are required to make your work brief and compressed and concentrated. We explained short in terms of portrayal of characters. Now, the skill that is involved there is to portray characters powerfully, effectively, authentically in the very few words that we are allowed in the short story form. Similarly, place. When we are depicting place, we cannot describe at length the location. We have to be brief. We have to portray the place brightly and clearly. And the same goes with time. The portrayal of time has to be done with clarity. And the events that we choose should be skillfully chosen, that these events reinforce the theme of the story that we are pursuing. All this means that writing short story involves writing and rewriting. You have to discover the great pleasure that is in rewriting. And some stories take several rewriting before it achieves any kind of perfection. I recall working on Gamaliel's Women, a story that we have been discussing in the previous sessions. It took me 10 or 12 drafts before that story was ready for publication. Now, the short story writer has a great challenge to use words carefully, to use words in an effective way, the right word in the right place, the best word in the best place. Now, this cannot be easily achieved. You have to bring all your skills of the language in order to achieve that goal. Your selection of words got to be exact. The short story writing is an exacting task. It is very much like writing poetry. Poetry also requires that same kind of exactness. We cannot overindulge in using adjectives or adverbs, because the short story has to move on and it has to reach the conclusion very quickly. You're not allowed too many adjectives, you're not allowed too many adverbs. You have to rely a great deal on verbs, and you have to use verbs forcefully and effectively. I think I've said enough about the concept of short in a short story or short fiction. I would like to proceed to discuss the next part of that concept of short story, short fiction. Fiction is in everyday usage. It's posed against fact. Fact versus fiction. Fact is supposed to be something which is truthful, which is documentary, which arrives at something which is like the real world as we know it. Fiction is regarded as something which is not exact. It is something which is made up, which is imaginary. Now, we have to be very careful with this use of the word fiction, because fiction is not necessarily something which is unreal or untruthful. You will discover as you use the fictional mode that it is sometimes a much more powerful way of expressing truth than fact. Now you look at the fiction in Gamaliel's Women. It uses the mode of fantasy. It uses the mode of constructing something which does not seem real, something which is surreal. But the story is able to make a very forceful statement on a very important truth about creativity. Mrs. Gamaliel fails as a person who is interested in accumulating material goods. She does not have a very prosperous life at the beginning. But through her creativity, she gains fame and she also accumulates some wealth. But the story makes an ironic comment about wealth at the end of the story. So the fictional mode is able to communicate something which is truthful. And this is why creativity is important in our life, because it is a way of communicating truth that cannot be done by any other mode as effectively and as powerfully. Now that is one use of the word fiction. There is another use of the word fiction. Fiction is commonly used by literary critics to refer to literature in general. Fiction refers to poetry, to short stories, to novel, to drama. And this is a very loose kind of use of the word fiction. When I use short fiction, I do that very advisedly. Now, short fiction and short story can be used interchangeably. They mean more or less the same thing, but there is a subtle difference. Now, fiction does not necessarily mean a story. Now, short story means there is a story. A story is a series of events which are linked together, chained together, and they form a beginning, a middle, and an end. But short fiction does not necessarily have a story. It can create a mood. It can just be the middle, or it can just be the end. And there may not be a beginning, a middle, and an end. It can be disjointed. It can express something poetic. Now this is what I aimed for in Gamaliel's Women. Gamaliel's Women is not a realistic story in the sense that it does not have the documentary quality that realistic stories have. Now most short story writers prefer the realistic mode because their goal is to portray a world that is very familiar. It is the world that everybody knows. Now, when I use the fictional mode, I use the mode of fantasy. I use a mode which is, I think, more correctly described as surreal rather than real. And surreal refers to kind of dreamlike quality. And it is a mode that is appropriately chosen for a story that is fantastic, that is about a woman who dies and then wakes up and finds herself in heaven. That is not an everyday occurrence. It is an extraordinary story. So you have to use an extraordinary style for it. And the style that I chose for the story is surrealistic, that is a dreamlike mode of expression. Now we'll proceed with our discussion, and I will read something from Gamaliel's Women in the next session, and then I will talk about other aspects of the craft of writing short fiction.